The movie opens with a gruesome scene where a group of people have been gunned down, their bloody bodies sprawled all over the floor. In the background, Andy's voice monologues about how she's been in the same situation countless of times and how she was exhausted from experiencing it. The scene changes and we're taken to an old town in the Middle East where Andy is walking the streets alone. Surprising her out of nowhere, Sebastian appears on his motorcycle and the two share a brief greeting. Once the pleasantries are over, Sebastian tells Andy that he has a rescue mission from the CIA who would lead them to South Sudan. Andy's not happy with the news, as it would be breaking the rule about never working for the same employer twice. Following Sebastian to a nearby hotel where they reconnect with their friends Nikki and Joe. After discussing the new mission with the group, Andy finally decides to hear what the CIA agent has to say. Heading out with Sebastian, Andy meets with Agent James. After a brief greeting, James briefs Andy and Sebastian about the kidnapped children in Sudan, telling them they could name their price, but the mission must be undertaken quickly. Telling him that they would contact him when the mission was done, Andy and Sebastian walked away. A few hours later, Andy and her friends had already set out to South Sudan, where they were dropped off by a helicopter and continued the rest of the walk by foot. The group finally arrives at the camp by nightfall and slowly sneaks into the rebel community, where the young girls are being held hostage. Taking out all the guards keeping watch, the mercenaries find the steel door that they assume has the children behind it. They force it open. Once they make it to the bottom of the stairs, a bright light flashes on their faces, making Andy realize that it's a trap. Before they have a chance to react, dozens of gunshots rain down on them, causing them to collapse. Assuming that they're dead, the assassin team let the guard down, unaware that Andy and the others were gaining consciousness. Before they could realize what was happening, Andy and her friends launched an attack, taking out the dozen or so assassins that were sent to kill them. Once they make sure that they're all dead, Andy looks around and sees cameras on all the angles of the room, realizing that they were set up by James to reveal their abilities. In the morning, Andy tells her friends that they need to find James and stop him from revealing their identity, telling them that she's done helping society. Meanwhile, in a different part of the world, in a remote town in Afghanistan, Sergeant Nile is questioning a group of Afghan women who are helping a fugitive. After finding their man and gunning him down, Nile has her throat slashed while attempting to stop the man's bleeding. Choking on her blood, Nile collapses while her friend desperately attempts to help her. While traveling on a cargo train, Andy and her friends are surprised by a vision that shows them there's another immortal amongst them, seeing Nile's face in their dreams. Telling them to head to France and find James, Andy decides to head to Afghanistan and retrieve the new immortal. Back in Afghanistan, Nile wakes up confused about having a dream about 4 strange people and is shocked when she sees that there's no scar on her. As she acclimates with her colleagues, Nile struggles to fit in as everybody seems suspicious of her. After being told that she's being taken to Germany for more tests, Nile is rescued by Andy, who manages to sneak into the camp. Waking up in the back of Andy's car, Nile attempts to escape, but Andy shoots her in the head just to prove a point. Once Nile wakes up, Andy promises her answers and asks her to return to the car. Giving Andy the benefit of the doubt, Nile follows her to an old cargo plane that they would be taking to Paris. On their way there, Nile asks Andy for answers, but Andy is only able to give her a few vague ones. But after taking a nap, Andy wakes up with her hands tied. After tricking her into untying her, Nile and Andy begin to fight, Andy attempting to show Nile the extent of her powers. Andy breaks Nile's hand and leg and then shows her how quickly she can heal, making her believe that what she's experiencing was real. Landing just outside of Paris, Andy and Nile connect with the rest of the team. During dinner, Nile awkwardly asks questions about what they are, and alternatively listens to the stories that they tell her. Andy also reveals that although they're immortal, they could possibly die one day when their wounds suddenly stop healing. That night, Nile wakes up gasping for breath after having a horrible dream. When she shares her dream with the others, they tell her she was having nightmares about one of their lost friends who'd been trapped in a box in the middle of the ocean, unable to be rescued by the others. Hearing this story, Nile's frightened by what her fate is going to be like because of her association with the Immortals. When Nile runs outside, Andy follows her in hopes of calming her down. During their conversation, they hear gunfire coming from the house and realize they've been found. Rushing back, Andy finds Sebastian healing from a large wound and shakes him awake to see if he's still alive. Realizing more was coming for them, Andy sneaks up on the army, waiting to kidnap them and massacre them with ease. After receiving the signal to come out, Nile is shocked by the carnage that Andy left behind, but impressed nevertheless with the oldest Immortal's skills. Realizing that they need to go somewhere, their location wasn't compromised. Andy takes Nile and Sebastian to her secret cave, where old moments were stored. Nikki and Joe, who'd been kidnapped from their safe house, check on each other in the back of the truck they were being transported in. The two men had been taken to meet James, who was anxiously waiting for them. Getting the two men into a private plane, James follows them close behind, wary of what they're capable of. After a long flight, Nikki and Joe are taken to meet Steven, James' benefactor, and the youngest CEO in the pharma industry. When the two Immortals arrive at Steven's fancy house, guarded by several mercenaries, Steven is excited to see his investment has finally ripped some profit. Telling Nikki and Joe that he doesn't need their permission to study them, Steven has his men drug them so they could be studied without creating an issue. When they're finally alone, James feels doubtful about Steven's intentions and tells him their work there has to help people, not to gather profit. But Steven, he doesn't care about James's opinions. In fact, he tells him that he owes him 2 more Immortals and then walks out of the room. In the secret cave, Andy realizes the wound she'd acquired during the early battle was not healing as expected. Fearing that her time to die had come, Andy leaves the cave for a bit to avoid suspicion from Sebastian and Andy. When Sebastian and Nile are left alone, Sebastian shares his sand experience of being immortal, telling her that he was forced to watch his family grow old and die, explaining that Nile would experience the same thing if she remained with her own. Heading out to a nearby convenience store, Andy purchases some supplies to bandage herself up and receives some assistance from the clerk. On her way back to her car, Andy remembers another very old Immortal who had died in her arms, and realizes that Nile's existence meant her time had come to an end. In one of Steven's laboratory facilities, Nikki and Joe are undergoing several tests where scientists cut up pieces of their anatomy for different studies. When they're given a few moments of rest, Nikki and Joe begin to reminisce about old times, trying to forget the frightening situation that they were in. Returning to their secret hideout after a long night of thinking, Andy is joined by Nile, who shares the background of her family, telling her that her father had also been a soldier. Looking at Nile intently, Andy tells her that she was unable to keep the promise that she made Quinn, the Immortal trapped in the middle of the ocean, but she would not fail to rescue Nikki and Joe. Their conversation is cut short when Sebastian comes out of their cave and tells them that he was able to find a promising address just outside of London. When they arrive at the location, Nile tells Andy that she wouldn't be going with them, explaining that she doesn't want to be a killer for the rest of her life. Unwilling to force her to come with them, Andy gives Nile the car and warns her to get rid of the weapons once she abandons the car. Saying her goodbyes, Nile drives to the nearest train station and attempts to follow through on Andy's orders, but realizes all the weapons were empty. At the location where Nikki and Joe were supposedly held hostage, Andy and Sebastian slowly sneak their way through the large glass house and the upstairs area where they see James standing in front of a large research board he had made of the Immortals. Gun in hand, Andy takes the lead and asks James where he'd taken their friends. Before she's able to do anything, Sebastian shoots her in the back, revealing that he was the one who betrayed the group. Devastated by the betrayal, Andy asks Sebastian why he'd done this, and with tears welling up in his eyes, He explains that he thought the scientists could discover how they would be able to die, allowing them to end their suffering. Noticing the blood pooling on her side, Sebastian realizes Andy was not healing like she normally did, and begins to panic. While Sebastian tries putting pressure on the wound and attempts to stop the bleeding, the place is swarmed by Steven and his dozens of guards who'd come to collect their prize. Injecting the Immortals with medication, Steven orders his men to take them away. Feeling immoral about subjecting someone who is now just human to the testing and potentially killing her, James refuses to go along with the plan, telling Steven that this was not what they agreed on. Unwilling to render his progress, Steven has one of his men attack James and leaves him passed out in his home. After being taken to the lab where Nikki and Joe are being held against their will, Steven gives explicit orders to keep Andy alive at all costs. After realizing something was terribly wrong, Nile returns to the house and finds James massaging his head. He was hurt from the sudden strike to the back of the neck. Startled by Nile holding a gun, he holds his hands up, willing to answer all of her questions. He tells her that Andy and the others had been taken to a secret facility where they were being tested to reveal their secret abilities. Regretful of what he had done, James offers to help Nile rescue her friends. Taking her to the facility where the Immortals are being held, James offers to come with her, but Nile refuses to take him with her, telling him that he might not survive the ordeal. Once he gets through the secret entrance, Nile says her goodbyes and enters the elevator. Using her ability to regenerate and her anonymity, Nile is able to shoot her way to the lab where the other Immortals are being held. Closing the steel door behind her, Nile quickly begins to unite her new friends, rushing against time before the place is flooded with Steven's guards. Although Joe insists they leave Sebastian behind, Andy refuses, telling them they need to stick together and get rid of Steven, or he would never stop hunting them. Putting Andy in the middle and protecting her with their body, the group begins to take out all the guards, skillfully eliminating their enemies. After taking on a lot of fire, Andy's tired of the amount of time that it's taking to get the team out and takes the lead. Incapacitating one of the guards, Andy gets information on where Steven is located, and the group makes their way up to the penthouse. Formulating a quick plan, the group charges in, taking out their enemies one by one. Once all the mercenaries had been killed, they realized that Steven was making his escape. When Joe, Nikki, and Sebastian go after Steven, Nile and Andy stay behind. Andy confessing that Nile reminded her of the good people that she'd been fighting for all of her life. Suddenly, the two women are surprised when Steven pops out of the other room with a gun aimed at Andy. Protecting her friend, Nile jumps in front of Andy and pushes Steven through the open glass, falling several floors to the ground. When the others arrive, they see Nile broken up, but her body starts to heal immediately. Grabbing their friend, the Immortals escape the vicinity before the authorities show up. Several days later, the group gathers together to decide Sebastian's fate. The group decides that they're going to exile Sebastian for 100 years for his betrayal, and he graciously accepts the sentence. The group then contracts James and tells him that he'd be their eyes and ears moving forward, protecting them from prying eyes. James happily accepts the task. 6 months later, Sebastian arrives at his apartment drunk and staggering. Seeing the door open, he pulls out his gun and is surprised to see Quinn standing there. Oh, now that one was epic. That was a really cool story, and I hope you guys think so too. Let me know what your favorite detail was in the comment section. Was it the character designs, their powers, their abilities, their skills? There's a lot of cool stuff happening here, so definitely let me know what you're thinking. And hey, while you're at it, make sure that you're subscribed to our channel and that you click the like button on this video. Okay, are you ready to keep binging? Check out this next movie recap that I have on screen for you now. Thanks. I'll see you in the next movie recap.